Madam, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, ma'am. This is Dr. Collins from Sacred Heart College.
Morning, sir.
Good morning, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, ma'am. Would you like to check your presentation, or you are comfortable, ma'am?
Yes. Shall I share my screen?
Sure, ma'am. Sure. Just a minute. Just a minute. Give me 2 seconds.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, sir.
Very good.
Good morning.
Very good morning, ma'am. This is Dr. Thomas Alvaidison.
Good, sir.
Ma'am, yes, ma'am. Could you try your presentation?
Sharing my screen. Just a second. Actually, I want to put this on the side, my PPT, so that I can see the next PPT which is coming. So I have shared part of screen.
Okay.
Check at your end and see if it's looking all right or not. I already shared.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, yes. It's coming.
It's coming. 1 minute.
Yes, 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 ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Through the second slide.
Sir, Edison, sir. Sir, Edison, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I can hear you, sir.
No, just because just check the ma'am's PPT, whether it is scrolling. Here it is fine. There, just check, sir.
Sir, your voice is breaking.
Sir, madam is sharing her PPT.
Yeah, I can see that, sir. I can see.
As she scrolls.
Yes, sir.
As she scrolls, kindly check.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, this is slide number 3, ma'am. This is slide number 4.
Yeah, I think that's okay. None of the portions are cut out, I think, because I'm sharing portion of the screen, so as to keep for myself the sequence.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Hope everything is fine. Good morning, yes. Sujata, ma'am. Sir, Sujata ma'am is in the Zoom.
Yes, she's available.
Please unmute her.
She's available. She's available. She's online.
Please unmute her. Yes,
ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes. Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am. This is Thomas.
A very good morning to you, Sujata ma'am.
Good morning. In fact, it's 7:15 for us. You know, these 5 days I've been waking up very early to listen to all of you, not just, present on my day. I've been waking up early to listen to all of you.
Same here. I was listening on YouTube all these days because I was multitasking, ma'am, with my daughter attending school at home.
Yeah, I know. I really understand.
But it was a very, very wonderful 5-day effort that you all have put up, ma'am. It's simply wonderful. It's simply wonderful.
No, it's mutual. We're all here to listen to you today.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Please, Colin sir.
Yes,
Colin sir. Please accept the acknowledgement from the Sujata ma'am and Namrata ma'am. Yes, here the hosting from broadcasting, especially YouTube, as well as this Zoom, Dr. Colin sir and his team, we would have taken care under the leadership of Dr. Maria, Reverend Father Maria. So we convey our best wishes and also best greeting to all this technical team under the headship of Reverend Father Dr. Maria Arukiraj.
Oh, Father's been so active, more active, I should say, than any one of the staff.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It's a teamwork. It's going on smoothly.
A very good morning to you, Father. This is Namrata. It was a pleasure listening to you on forensic linguistics. I just, stayed glued in throughout the session.
What time is it there? Is it 9:45 there?
It's 9:50 here already. But
Sir, Edison, sir. Edison, sir.
No, it's 9:47, ma'am.
Okay.
Thomas, sir. Sir,
Yes, sir.
sir, who is the moderator has come?
Just a second, sir. Everybody who entered, I think, sir.
Okay, sir. Okay,
Entered
sir.
the moderator.
Okay, sir.
So,
Okay.
Mr. Thomas, good morning.
Let me tell you the moderator name and all everything.
Okay, sir. Then in the meantime, I'll play the video. Therefore, I mean, the participants will be informed about the timings.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you, sir. Have a nice day.
Stop sharing. I'll stop sharing then, right?
Sure, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes.
Please stay online, ma'am. We will connect you. Thank you.
Father, good morning, Father. Father, good morning. Sujata here. Please unmute Father. I think Father's...
Yes, ma'am. I've given unmute. Father, good morning. Father, good morning. Father? No, I think he is not able to hear, ma'am. I mean, his audio is not working. Father, good morning.
Father's audio, I think, is...
Yes, audio has got struck.
Colin, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Professor Bharati. She's the moderator for the morning session.
Okay, sir. Okay.
I hope she entered. Please check, sir.
No, sir. Not yet. Not yet.
Okay, sir. Let me call her.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
அன்மியூட் பண்ண மாட்டேங்கிறாங்க. பாரதி மேம் நம்பர் இருக்கா? sir. Good morning, sir. Thomas, sir.
Later, start my video.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please tell me, sir.
I want to contact Bharati ma'am. She is online. I can talk to her. Madam, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
This is Collins from Sacred Heart College. Ma'am, okay. Right.
Okay,
I just wanted to check your audio. You are ready?
Yes, sir,
No?
yes, sir.
You are ready.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The
Yes,
resource
sir.
person is already here with us in the room.
Yes.
So
Yes, sir.
we can start on time. Okay, ma'am?
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
You could start, Ma.
Okay.
You could start.
Thank you, sir. Good morning to one and all. It's my great pleasure to welcome the gathering on the 5th day International Conference 2020. On behalf of the collaborative organizations, namely Thiruvalluvar University, Vellore, Laila College, Chennai, Sacred Arts College, Tirupattur, and Government Tirumahal Mills College, Gudiyatham. This is Bharti from Government Tirumahal Mills College. It is my honor to introduce the resource person, Professor Namrata Rathore Mahanda, to this session. She is presently working at her alma mater, Mahila Mahavidyalaya, Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi. Her topic today is diasporic imaginary. The term diaspora is defined, the term diaspora is derived from an ancient Greek origin, which means to scatter. Her doctoral thesis is based on the diasporic concerns in V.S. Nepal's writings on India, the Indian trilogy. Her areas of interest also includes comparative literature and Indian writing in English. She has also worked on the 2 UGC major research projects, which deals with the gender, religion, and cultural practices of Indian women. She has also designed coursework for the EPG, Path Shella, and Indira Gandhi National Open University. Presently, she is teaching English literature in Mahila Mahavidyalaya, Banaras Hindu College, Varanasi. Now, I would like to hand over the proceedings to Professor Namrata Rathore Mahanda.
Thank you so much, Professor Bharti. It is indeed a great honor and privilege for me to be presenting myself on this virtual platform. So before I begin, I wish to my sincere thanks and heartfelt gratitude to all the organizers for having given me this opportunity to present my work here, and also for the wonderful 4 days of enrichment that I enjoyed over the past 4 days of the web conference. A very big thank you to the organizers. A very good morning to all my colleagues, co-teachers, and the audience for today. I am going to talk about the diasporic imaginary today, and before I proceed, I exactly I'm going to do. So my presentation today is divided into 3 parts. In the first part, I explore the moorings of the diaspora studies. In the second part, I focus on the diasporic imaginary as such. And very briefly, in the third and final part of the presentation, I focus on the problematics on the diaspora industry 4.0 interface, what it may entail, the rosy side and not the so rosy side. That is my attempt so far. So here we go. Now, when we talk about diaspora, friends, we know that it is a movement of people across the globe propelled by compelling circumstances, a variety of reasons. And these have created geographically dispersed communities in this ever-changing global scene. The common denominator that runs through all this is a shared experience, a common shared experience of a certain loss, a certain deep rupture, and also of numerous intersections, combinations, and forging of connections, new connections that come with strategies of survival. So friends, I invite you to join me to explore the complex domain of diaspora studies and develop your own distinctive response to this multi-dimensional paradigm. And a brief note here for the students attending this session. Of course, with the permission of the organizers, all the PPT and the resources referred to in this lecture will be made available to them. So here we go. Now, the term diaspora, the way I conceive of it, I put a small picture here of a megamix, a complex entity of numerous permutations and combinations, which is very difficult to solve, and every interface gives up a new rubric. So in this manner, through this image of the megaminx, I want to capture a metaphor for the diaspora experience. And I want to say that this experience bears the unique distinction of being a continuously evolving term, a constantly evolving term. And its hydra-headed progression. There is no such linear progression. A hydra-headed progression eludes a fixed definition or classification. But then the self, here at the center, I have posited the self. This self which experiences, which undergoes the experience. So this experiential self is both the source as well as the destination for formulations such as, and we can see this here, identity formation, family, community, host society, homeland, aspiration, and these are just to name a few. There's so many more. And these are once again factored on varied paradigms, which I have attempted. Some of course, this is not a comprehensive list. Some of them I have attempted to list here. The issues of memory, erasure, temporality, the counter histories, the dystopia, the utopic imaginations, the yearning for a utopic homecoming, adaptation, alienation, all these come together to create a complex megaminx. So having observed now that there is no such linear or hierarchical classification on which we can model our understanding of the diaspora. So let us begin in the middle of things, in medias res, as they say. So let us jump into it and look at some of the ways in which scholars have made attempts to map the terrain that is the subject of our investigation today. Now here in the third slide, you see two names here. I've just taken the two names for ease of simplicity and to provide a coherence. So we find that Clifford and Tertullian, as quoted in Clifford, stress on the multiplicity, the overlapping, and the unformed taxonomy of this area of which we know as diaspora studies. So we find that this term diaspora bears a unique distinction. It is an evolving term, and so the scholars, two of them only are listed here. All scholars, mostly all scholars, are unanimous in one agreement, and that is the feature of dynamism and realignment and multiple realignments is inbuilt within every rubric that is associated with the term diaspora studies. Now, Clifford, as you say, calls it an unroot, and he further goes on to say that jostle and converse in an effort to characterize the contact zones of cultures and regions. Clifford also quotes Kaushik Tullian, who is the editor of the journal Diaspora, and who agrees with him. And he says that the term, in its historicity, it described Jews, Greeks, and Armenian dispersions. But now, in the present context, it shares meanings with a larger, much larger semantic domain. And that has now come to include words like immigrant, expatriate, refugee, guest workers, exiled communities, overseas communities, and ethnic communities. A small clarification here that exiles, immigrants, expatriates, refugees, and diaspora were classically classified into distinct categories based on, as we will see further, the discursive 5-point, 3-point, and 6-point markers, classifiers that were applied to them. But in the present scenario, with the similarity of experience being the common denominator as opposed to the geographical and temporal moorings that were the, you can say, grading scale earlier, we have come to acknowledge a more diverse definition for what is a diaspora. At every point, the experience of the self, as we saw, and the commonality of that experience is at the core. Now, let's take a quick step back and look at the origins. And most of you would be familiar with the origin of the term. So we'll go over this very quickly. And we find that in the Hebrew Bible, in the Torah, and in the 28th chapter of the Deuteronomy, that is called the Devarim by the Jews, the two verses are there, 25 and 64. You will note here that the word diaspora or its translation is not used here, but the sense of having to suffer and flee, the sense of multi-directional scattering is, and the terrifying predicament that it presents is outlined here. When we come to verse 25, it says, the Lord will cause you to be broken before your enemy. And verse 64 will say, the Lord will scatter you among all the nations. So you'll flee in 7 directions, the idea of scattering. So, and this is being built up. We cannot say that it was not non-existent. The idea, we find it there in the form of a terrible predicament. Next, we come to the etymology per se, and we find that it derives from a Greek etymological source. However, the two parts, dia and spin, it does not have the same injunction here that we saw in the Torah, because here it is more used more in the sense, the words, the Greek terms were themselves the botanical terms, or you can say agricultural terms, which meant that to sow at a great distance, to sow widely. But here it is used to signify the dispersal of the Jewish population and experience of exile, and of course it carries all those negative connotations with it. Now we come to the next one. Now, as we had seen in the previous slide itself, that the term diaspora is dynamic, it is fluid, it has encompassed so much, amalgamated so much. So what then is the benefit of turning back to the classical motive of the diaspora, the Jewish motive, the Jewish Armenian motive of the diaspora? What is there for us as students of diaspora studies? Now, one thing, the terrible predicament and its ensuing misery here posits the diaspora subject in the victim prototype. And so we turn to this classical motive to understand what is this victim prototype, where the dispersal is actively orchestrated. So the dispersal is motivated by the suffering subjects in order to escape the political powers, the dominant powers that seek to exterminate them. And so here we have three models here, four models here for the African slavery model, the Armenian genocide model, the Irish famine and Palestinian model, where ironically the creation of the homeland of Israel created the diasporic victim position for the Palestinians. Now we turn to this motif because now further as we move, we are going to distinguish this victim prototype from the subject position of colonialism. Now, where dislocation is not actively orchestrated by the colonial subjects, in so much as it is economically, politically, and coercively orchestrated by the colonial forces through their exercise of power and, in the case of the Indian diaspora, often deceit. And then also by the impossibility of return. After the period of indenture, the impossibility of return loomed large before them. So here we have two such categories, which of course I would not prefer to call these categories. We can say two prototypes, one of the victim, another of the subject positions, where the subject position is imposed by the colonial powers. And we quickly move on to the next one. Now, here I have listed for you, for the sake of brevity, important landmarks in diaspora studies. So we have work, see, 80s was the time when diaspora as a field of academic inquiry gained a lot of momentum. But then nevertheless, much before diaspora studies emerged as with its disciplinary and theoretical formulations, the idea was very much prevalent in the studies which you come across in anthropology, sociology, and psychology. So in fact, it was the coming together of these influences on the experience of the diaspora. So we have named here few scholars, well-known scholars, Gabriel Scheffer, William Safran, who gives us the 6-point classification, Vijay Mishra, who disagrees, as also James Clifford, who disagrees with this, and Paul Gilroy, who talks at length about about translating the experience so that it can be experienced by others and a common bond be formed. Having seen these 5 inputs, we come to classification, a famous classification of diaspora given by William Safran. Now he gives these 6 points, but here is a caveat. Safran, at the end of listing these, none of the diasporas may exhibit all the 6 features. They may be loosely applicable in some cases they may just not. That may just not be the case. So Safran does not insist that diaspora studies must categorize experiences and writings of those experiences, narrations of those experiences on these particular 6 criteria. But 2 are very important to Safran. That is, he posits the 2 points, one of departure and one of the arrival. So departure from the original homeland and arrival into another homeland. And of course, there is an overgeneralization that you find here, that it is assumed that the person who is dispersed from the original homeland is actually displaced from the center. Now, those of us who have access to the Indian experience of diaspora will know that caste, class, religion played a very important role in the diasporic classification of Indians. So to say, those who took on the journey across the black waters as indentured laborers. So to say that all of them held a very central and very comfortable and a safe position here in the homeland is is maybe an overgeneralization. However, the second one, the memory, vision, or myth about their homeland, we find this feature across diverse writings of the diaspora. And this idea of homeland, this mythical homeland, is often, layered by many rose-tinted visions and often attributed with things that they did not exist, in order to offer solace and comfort to the tortured subjects of the diaspora. And then there is this alienation that they cannot be accepted by the host country, and they yearn for the ancestral home, a return which, of course, they realize at another level that may not be the case. However, they carry that identity with them as a token or as a distinctive identity marker through which they want to make sense of the world around them. And then in cases they are committed to the maintenance and restoration of this homeland. This we have seen a number of times, even in the case of India with the gold bonds we saw, and numerous other cases we keep seeing the involvement of the diaspora. And the fanfare with which now the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas is being conducted over the past few years also adds to this. Now the question arises that if we follow William Safran's classification, are all diasporas that have a common origin and a common destination have similar experiences? And the answer there we find is definitely not, because the experiences are based on so many other markers, which Safran himself says are not exhaustively listed here. Now we find that there are some departures from the Safran's classification, and 3 of them have been listed here. Let's take up the last one first, because we relate with it perhaps in the closest manner. So the South Asian diaspora is not so much concerned with coming back, but then they want to drop roots where they are, build temples, have their cultural proliferation, and build their gurudwaras, and then drop their roots, their cultural roots in that place. And they want to grow those roots there, while the homeland exists in the practice of day-to-day life and their self-actualization. Now, the other 2, and here it says that the teleology of return, it does not apply to the African American or Caribbean or British cultures, where the diasporas at these locations have no option to return anywhere. And the case of Fiji, I would like to bring up here, where the Indian diaspora had suffered much in the 80s and 90s because they had no right to hold land. It was just leased to them. So I find that the ideal prototype of the Jewish diaspora can hardly be emulated. Now, Robin Cohen makes 2 edits, and he adds some points to Safran's classification. The 2 edits that he makes here is that he wants to posit a common experience, not on the basis of the common geographical location of the homeland, but often the memory of a common traumatic event. Now, if the common traumatic event that is common to the members of the diaspora has greater validity in granting equal access to whatever experience they face in terms of diasporic classification, as opposed to assuming that everybody occupied the center here and no one was at all marginalized and did not suffer at all in the homeland. So this carries a greater reliability of experience. And also the 5th point, he amends it by shifting the focus from maintenance to restoration of the homeland into an imagined homeland. Now, this imagined homeland might occur in the material objects in the house. So the idea is not to return to the homeland, but all right, to get hold of some artifact that defines or brings memory of the homeland or defines your cultural identity. So the artifacts, the ways and practices of living, these are sought to be preserved, accumulated, and a return to these rather than to the actual homeland. A return to these artifacts, experiences, and objects marks the return to the homeland in a metaphorical way. Now there are a few additions, 4 of them, and quickly we will go through these. Again, it's Robin Cohen who says that groups may disperse for varied reasons. And so voluntary migrants also qualify as diaspora, as well as the imperial and the colonial settlers. Despite the complex subterranean anxiety of relationships, the tension between ethnic national and transnational identity is often a creative, enriching one. Here again, there is an addition that he makes, that it is not that all transactions with the host society or with multi-ethnic diasporas and in the host society and the host society are always debilitating or damaging in ways. Cohen sees these as sites for rich, creative regeneration and transactions. And then there is a sense of co-responsibility with the other members in other countries, co-ethnic members, members of the same ethnicity in other countries, to generate a mobilization of a collective identity. And now with a small example, which comes to my mind right now from VS Naipaul, the co-responsibility among co-prioritized over all other categorizations. And in Naipaul, in places in Letters Between Father and Son, and also in the recent biographical work, The Naipals of Nepal Street, written by his younger sister, Saviakal Naipaul, we come across instances where religion, which is so important a category in the Indian experience, dissolves under the shadow of this co-ethnicity in the diaspora, in the indentured experience. So much so that the second and the third generations would not feel an anxiety to make marriage connections or alliances with people of the same ethnicity, even if they do not belong to the same religion. And again, not in Naipaul, but elsewhere, there is the case of the book Jivan Prakash. It is the biography of a person, for a follower of Islam, who went in as an indentured subject to the Caribbean. And there he professed himself to be a scholar of Mahabharata and Ramayana, and looked up, and he invented himself as a religious leader without having changed his name his surname. And it's very much possible for the people crossing the seven seas, any caste, they could, there would be relations of brotherhood and sisterhood, and you could take on any caste that you please, which was not so in the homeland. Sorry. The fourth one, Robin Cohen says that it can be used to describe transnational bonds of co-responsibility, even where historically exclusive territorial claims are not strongly articulated. Now, with the world coming together and this is Clifford, and this is in 1994, and the world had really not come together in a digital capsule as it has now. But they talk about the modern technology and how it attempts to take the place, it attempts to erase the barriers created by borders, geography, and promotes transnationalism. Now, Clifford defines diasporas, and he says that the reasons for the dispersal of the diaspora discourse, the proliferation of the diaspora discourse to take in so many categories, so many influences, and create a common denominator based only on experience, is listed here in 6 very short points, where we find that the decolonization, new patterns of immigration, enhanced global communication, possibility of inhabiting transnational locations, like having 2 homes, one here and one there, and moving to and fro between those, possibility of forging alliances that draw upon the common historical experiences, such as the disposition or the uprooting, or say the Sikh community in Canada, particularly the agrarian community. So drawing upon the common experience. And then you have the travel circuits created by mass communication, globalization, post-colonialism, neo-colonialism, and cultural networks. And we are here transcending this time and in the same time frame and in different locations on this virtual platform. So what it means for the diaspora is even more comprehensive. Now we come to some big names here. 3 of these are you can say narrative works in prose. And the last one is a work of fiction. However, we find that all of these show certain categories. We take up Anderson ones. Now he says that imagined communities, he says that the imagined communities, they have an idea of national identity. But Anderson warns us that this identity is not common, that it is variously factored. And in order to understand the idea of nation or nationality for a particular group, we must know from where, from what position they look at the concept. Similarly, Homi Bhabha talks about hybridity, and he talks about how the nation, the idea of nation is dispersed, it is disseminated. In Imaginary Homelands, Rushdie also talks about the multiplicity of experiences and the inevitability of return. I have chosen from so many available texts, this particular text by Amitav Ghosh, In an Antique Land, because it presents before you 2 conditions, 2 examples, so you can say, or 2 motifs separated by centuries. So one is experience of a diaspora through trade, commerce, and the things that he retrieves from the archives. And the other is the present day interaction, where a person is seen as a guest, or worse, as an intruder, and a person not to be trusted, devoid of trust, in the diasporic situation. So it is the idea of trust in the case of the 2 examples in Antique Land that I wanted to point out here. Now, diasporas old and new. What do we mean by diasporas old and new? Scholars have referred to this, Vijay Mishra's article, New Lamps for Old, and others. So they have referred to 2 patterns, not to say that people migrated differently. No. The way, the formulations which we took to the diaspora experience that formulation is categorized as old and new. This categorization refers on the newer usages. It is not that the experience of indenture was the old experience and the experience of transnational migration or working from two locations is a new thing. No, this is a referent to the ways, the limited ways in which the old diaspora was classified and now the new one. So the usage of the term, first, second, and third. The first one refers to any kind of dispersal. And then it blurs all those distinctions, whether it is more voluntary or more forced form or less forced form. The second emphasizes on return. And this is like a circular exchange of mobility of people, where people would say that, all right, I can stay anywhere, but then I need to go home. And I need to stay near an airport, to quote a diaspora subject. And third, well, both old and new usages, they emphasize that diaspora groups, they do not assimilate in regions of immigration, but they go beyond this idea and they create something new, a certain innovation. They forge new bonds. And then we say whether this integration and its cultural distinctions, whether they can coexist or not. That is, we divide with Habermas into the public and private domain. And there are alliances which we would form in the public domain, which would not be given place in the private domain. So they can coexist or they may not exist. Let us take here one example of the Chinese diaspora in Kolkata. So what do we find? These the Chinatown there, or the Chinatowns. There are Chinatowns all over the world. So so the inhabitants of these Chinatowns, they have been staying there, third generation and fourth generation also. You do not find in the municipal election so many placards exhibiting their names, but then they are a hub of financial activity. They carry on their financial activity and they continue with a very normal lifestyle, a very assimilated lifestyle outside the place, the zone, which is called as the Chinatown. So Chinatown then coexists with a distinctiveness which is held on to and an assimilation which is done in the public space. Here again, I would like to quote one example from Naipaul, once again from letters, which Naipaul's father wrote to his oldest daughter, Kamala Naipaul. And incidentally, Kamala Naipaul studied at the college where I teach now and where I studied. And so there she wants to marry a particular person of Indian origin who is not a Hindu. Now, in the letter, and please, their apologies, advance apologies. The intention is not to offend, but just to underscore the double matrix of assimilation and non-assimilation occurring within the same spatial temporal frame. So then when she declares, first, she does not declare her intention to marry. But then when she does declare, the father writes in a letter that it's all right if he is a good Christian of Indian origin and the person was in Fiji at that time. Of course, she could not marry that person later due to political circumstances there. But then he says, but he should never be a Mohammedan. Now look at this bias. Few minutes ago, we were talking about the Hindu, Muslim, Christian assimilation in the Caribbean, in the public sphere. So that, and we saw, history has recorded this, that in the Jose massacres, that were the people were, Indian origin people were massacred because they were celebrating the Muslim festival, taking out the Tazda. And the maximum people who were massacred were Hindus. They were participating wholeheartedly in that. and a Muslim scholar teaching the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, the public sphere, and in the private sphere, in the intimate space of letters between father and daughter, we find that no such assimilation. The assimilation is only very, very superficial. So coexistence, non-existence, layered existence, or an pragmatic existence. Now, a very important term that we have here, and I think perhaps I may move very quickly. So, in a very short manner, in a capsule, so to say, let's say that transnationalism and globalization, these are seen as both empowering features of diaspora as well as the disempowering features of the diaspora. Empowering because they allow the subjects of the diaspora to make new formulations based on new shared experiences, new commonalities, and then the opportunity to have a connection with the country of your origin, and then to reformulate your social identity in whatever adaptive reconfigurations, whether it is financial, social, upwardly mobile, all that is possible without losing the thread which binds you to the homeland. So that as such, in transnational diasporas, they contain the empowered individuals, and yes, the disempowered individuals. The transnationalism, transportation or travel from one place to another, as we know, it also has an underbelly of illegal migrations, of people being working as slaves in the locations where they are without valid papers and no opportunity to go. So that again is the underbelly. This brings me, the 15th slide, to the end of the first part of my presentation. Now I move on to the second part. Here I have made an attempt to encapsulate the term diasporic imaginary. As I referred earlier, this is drawn from the psychosocial moorings of the term imaginary. And here is of course, it is not in a linear progression, but for the lack of a better arrangement or a better way of listing, I've just used this clip art here. This is nowhere to underscore the linearity of this discourse. But we find that Sartre says, he tells us how we as the humans, we formulate and imagine our existence and our relation to the world that is around us. And the text that I'm referring to here is the Imaginary, a phenomenological psychology of imagination. Now, then Lacan, he gives us the idea of the triple unity, or the three things coming together. That is the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real, and how these occur in the internal mindscape. Van Habermas with his public stress on the public sphere, and Anderson talks about the imagined communities and the issue of nationalism, wherein we had discussed in one of the previous slides that Anderson warns that the idea of nation is not to be taken in a solidarity position or in a uniform position. You have to understand the individual experience and see from which position the subject approaches the idea of nation. And then Stuart Hall, he talks about cultural identity, and diasporas. Apart from the psychosocial paradigm, and we have the overlapping category of the socio-cultural paradigm. We have Charles Taylor. He says that the social imaginary allows us to imagine our surroundings, or literally it allows us to see ourselves and how we should make sense of the world around us through images, metaphors, rituals, and stories. Then we have the concept, the same concept, which is given by, again, Cornelius Castoriadis, wherein he says that in the social imaginary, we create a proper an appropriate world for the society so that there is no chaos. The psyche of the individuals can be shaped in a particular manner which is conducive to the good of the society. And so instead of the chaotic universe, you create a social order and ordered universe, so to say. Again, we have Graham Ward, and he says that the culture, the social is situated and within the culture, and it emerges from the culture. So we must posit culture in a position of primacy as opposed to the social. And lastly, but not the least, we have the case of the social imaginary propounded by Arjuna Padurai. And here he says that the image, the imagined, and the imaginary, these three things, the image, the imagined, and the imaginary, the three in global cultural transactions, they create patterns of power. So here we find is the move from the victim position to the empowered position. Of course, more often, strategies of survival are the first ones to be put in place by a social or cultural imaginary. But having done that, the same factors can be used to create positions of empowerment. Vijay Mishra, he talks about the diasporic imaginary in specific context with the Indian diaspora. And he says that these diasporic imaginaries, they are multiple and they are said to occupy, they exist on the border zones, on the zones of contact, where the diasporas are more fluid, more social formulations can occur, and then they are happy to live, as I quoted earlier, wherever there is an international airport. And now we find that all said and done, this is a very, very culture-specific term. And before we really wind this up, I would like to introduce just one more use of the imaginary in both the Lacanian sense and the other Clifford's sense, by both of which draw upon the work of Slavoj Žižek. Now, Žižek, he defines imaginary as a state of identification. So according to Žižek, we identify with an image in which we would like to see ourselves. The existence of that image, the creation of that image, which essentially we lack in the present, but which we create out of a sense of future, looking forward to a future sense of enjoyment, lies at the core of this imaginary. And he says, he uses a term which I will come to in the next slide, that is the nation thing. Žižek moves on from the imaginaries to a complex idea of the nation thing. And here he underlines the pitfalls of this, which can take on very dangerous propositions and cause a lot of violence in the social fabric. Now, he says that when we conceive, the subjects of the nation conceive the idea of the nation, they have the idea of the nation thing, a particular idea of something which they would love to have and enjoy. And he says that you have to see from where they desire. You do not have to see their desire for this nation thing, but you have to see from where they desire. And if the desire is from a lack, then automatically anyone who desires the nation thing joins a particular platform where, without having done anything to create a platform or to do something for the nation, or do your own work well, or without contributing in any way, just by taking on that identity which guarantees self-fulfillment, self-appreciation, and enjoyment, you create the other. So that the person who is not the dominant other of the nation thing can be marginalized, can be identified as a victim, and then can be held responsible for all the wrongs that are being suffered by the dominant communities. And so the host country, it can be at the receiving end of hostility and discrimination. I'm tempted once again to look at the Indian scenario where time and again other cultures where time and again ethnicity, alliance to a particular lost homeland succeeds in othering the person. And then we have seen in history the havoc it creates when the dominant nation thing is taken over effortlessly in a sense of enjoyment, and any lack is attributed to the agency of the other, and the other is banished or exterminated. So this formulation has impacted both the works of Clifford as well as Mishra. Now, what is then the importance of remembering? Both Vijay Mishra in this specific reference to the Indian diaspora says that it is very important to remember. The generations, the further generations of diaspora having assimilated into the host fabric, chalked out new cultural transactions, new destinies, must never give up the importance of remembering, because this remembering is essential. According to Mishra, the social the diasporic imaginary also comprises this act of remembrance, where one needs to remember their own memories of slavery and coolie life. And in the modern times, he refers to the graveyard shifts and work in sweatshops. The less fortunate transnational immigrants find themselves there due to lack of proper documents. And so the nation state needs the diasporic imaginary to remind it of its past, and the past of which it is ashamed, a past of persecution, a past of discrimination, which is eager to deny and forget. That memory must be kept in place, because this balance is needed to even out the dominant communities and the enjoyment of the nation thing. It can occur at any point of time. We now hear of the new Nazis in the news. So, and then to deny that experience of pleasure to anybody else, and the creation of terror pockets and such things. Now, this brings me to the end of my second part, and the third part is very, very brief. So I'll just take here, I'll quickly scroll through these three pictures of indentured experience, the act of remembering. One, I would like to point out here, Coolie Women, the Odyssey of Indenture by Gayatri Bahadur. This book talks about the sisterhood or the Jahaji Behen, as you would call it. And also a lot of women's experiences are recorded in David Debedine's edited work. Here we mark your memory. And the Inside Indian Indenture refers to this Indian experience in the South Africa. Now, the core concepts quickly. First, a reformulation of the core concept of diaspora is by releasing the fixed notion of hybridity, geographical dislocation, and replacing these by a dynamic socio-cultural practice of exchange, which brings together and forges new connections in diverse communities. The spatial model of rupture from homeland is now replaced by a more analytical model, which has shared experience, memories, and longings. I quickly come to the last part of my presentation. Here is Industry 4.0. And I see this as a double-edged sword. Good if it is used, but then as we know, technology or power in inept hands leads to a disaster for those who are powerless to protest. So let us now see what is this Industry 4.0. It is the fourth technological revolution, and some scholars mark it as 2010. And they are applauding the role of diaspora, especially till before the pandemic situation. They were applauding the role of the Chinese diaspora as well as the Indian diaspora. And they are saying that this has transformed the global networks, which are very integral to the technological revolution, Industry 4.0. Now, this is based on three things: connectivity, intelligence, and automation. Now, what has the diaspora or the new transnational multi-pronged experiential analytical theorizations of diaspora or the experience got to do with this Industry 4.0? We'll look at it very briefly. Now, we say that diaspora networks, as they are seen by three virtues. Now, first, they speed the flow of information, and see all these examples I've taken from the blog of a person called Ross Dawson. Now, this Ross Dawson is a globally well-known Australian. He is a futurist in that he makes certain predictions related to technology, an entrepreneur, and also an author. You would like to know that way back in 2002, he had written about how social networking is going to take center stage in the next few years. And so he's a famous person here, and he gives us examples from the Chinese diaspora. Based on these 3 points which we had seen here. So what is it that the diasporas do that they score heavily on these 3 points of connectivity, intelligence, and automation? First example he gives of a Chinese businessman in South Africa who sees a demand for a certain product, and he quickly informs his cousin who runs a factory in China. So this, what has happened, a quick connectivity. And second is the concept of trust. Diasporas foster trust, and the factory owner will believe what his cousin tells him, and he will quickly act on it, and he will seal a deal worth millions with a single conversation on Skype. And so this is how the diaspora networks, they foster a quick, fast-paced, and intelligent decision-making. And the third and the most important is that diasporas create connections across ethnicities. That is, they help people with good ideas collaborate with each other, both within their ethnic groups and across different ethnic groups. So that is why the diaspora are seen as the, you can say, the heroes who are going to bring about or the Industry 4.0 revolution. But then this collaboration is widely appreciated. Again, from Ross Dawson, you have examples of, and this time the Indian scientists. And he quotes a study conducted by University of California, where it says that more than half of Indian scientists and engineers, they share their tech and business opportunities with people in their home countries. And the 80% of those returning back to India maintain at least monthly contact with family and friends in America. And of course, this 66% is much higher, I think 80% for the Chinese diaspora, Chinese entrepreneurs. So it's a win-win situation for diaspora, because the diaspora have strived to build their careers, to posit themselves in host societies, and they carry notions with them, notions like, for example, the academic inclination is very high in the Chinese and in the Indian diaspora, so to say, as to the Native American populations. And you have families which are really into academics and promoting their children and even near relatives by bringing them there. So are we going to conclude by saying that now we ring out the old and ring in the new, in Tennyson's words? Or are we going to proceed with some caution? See, it cannot be denied here that the migrants are now connected like never before. There is no question of a rupture from the homeland. You have the mobile phone, you have the digital communication, you have the digital platforms. So this is a profound break from the older tradition. But then this break alone, will it ensure that the marginalized diasporas will suddenly find themselves, as Carlo that says, in the thick of things as the world becomes network? Will it automatically lead to the empowering of the diaspora communities? Or we have to be circumspect and see whether this will just be another phase of exploitation for the diaspora. But for now, the scene seems all set. The scene seems all set for the diaspora. And this is a particular kind of diaspora, the highly educated, university educated with research degrees in science and medicine and technology, that is going to ride this wave of 4.0. There are other diasporas which are not going to be so fortunate. And here Vijay Mishra draws the two paradigms. One is the tech-savvy, highly educated person in the Silicon Valley. And there he can access the homeland from his drawing room or from his living room or from the office. And this kind of individual will be considered as an asset, both by the host and the homeland. But what about the Afghan refugee in Australia, or the victim of violence from Afghanistan or Fiji, often rendered helpless without a passport, having no option but to work in sweatshops and on graveyard shifts, which are then they are neither global nor hyper-connected. They cannot move from one place to another without their documents. So we need to proceed with in 4.0, Industry 4.0, as a country, and as a country that has begun to take some great deal of interest in its diaspora population abroad, and even giving the option of dual citizenship in the 21st century to the persons of Indian origin. We find that this is a time to proceed with caution, and it may not lead to a very rosy acceptance of diaspora suddenly taking center stage and becoming all important in their host country. I end this presentation with a book here, and I have taken not a book from literature, but then this is a popular prose from science. It is the gripping story of 5 Hungarian scientists who escaped from Budapest, and they later escaped Germany, Nazism, and forged interconnections on American soil. And they changed the face of science in the 20th century. And their names are Theodor von Karman, John von Neumann, Leo Szilard, Edward Teller, and Eugene Wigner. Names you would know and recall from our school physics classes. So technology or no technology, interconnections, the subterranean interconnections have always been an asset for diaspora populations. It has helped them reimagine themselves in diverse ways. It remains for us to see how the diasporic imaginaries, and here at the end, I would like to add a plural here, would fare and would survive the wave of Industry 4.0. Thank you so much for your patient hearing.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, can we have some questions for discussions now?
Sure, ma'am. All questions are welcome.
Okay. The first question is, do you think in the era of globalization, the very diaspora sentiment is getting diluted? Question by Geeta Sri Mukherjee.
Okay. See, the diaspora experience in the era of globalization, I would reserve my comment that it is not getting diluted. I would prefer the term, it is getting diverse. That is, the fact or the experience of globalization is adding to certain experiences. It is adding to the host of experiences. And not by not having access to certain experiences of indenture. Not to say that technology or globalization does not have its own set of tortures, its own set of exclusions. If you see that globalization has empowered, yes, but has it diluted the feeling of anxiety, of alienation? No. The feeling of anxiety and alienation looms large in diaspora communities. Now more than ever, with radicalization and the rise of the radical right globally, I find that it has become more acute than ever in the past. I hope I have been able to address this question.
Okay, the second question is,
yes,
how is transnational literature different from literature of the diaspora?
Now see, these literatures, transnational literature, literature of the diaspora, are, or I would add to this two more terms. Let us see, world literature. I find that these categorizations and the lot of theorizations that are associated with it attempt to oversimplify the complexities of the experience. So for me, I would like to take this this position on this issue, that if a particular critical perspective, no matter whether it is transnational, diasporic, or global, helps me to understand a particular work of indigenous literature or global literature or transnational literature, then it is of value. So I take these under the rubric of common shared experience. Movement in the transnational phase has its own set of experiences which are not very diverse from the ones of the diaspora. Only the paradigms have changed, the material cornerstones which cause those experiences have changed. So in our democratic country, where you have civil rights, where you have the law, does it make immune, does access to transnational location make one immune to processes of discrimination? No. It survives, it prevails. And so the body of literature, yes, you can distinguish on a thematic basis, based on the themes that are contained in that particular work of literature. You can classify it as transnational. For example, you can say Uma Parameswaran or Bharati Mukherjee, such cases you can say, and that, yes, this is what I would qualify as a transnational experience. But then, once again, if you delve deeper, do you not find the unraveling of multiple layers of the common experience of the diaspora there? Next, please. Any other questions, please? Professor Bharti ma'am?
Bharati ma'am, you can ask questions. Bharati ma'am?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
Questions, ma'am?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
We have question from Francis Peter. Father Francis Peter.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Why some countries or virtually migrant nations fine-tune the differentiation between diaspora and contemporary migrant?
Fine-tune the differences between diaspora and contemporary migrant. I missed the first part of the question. If you can come again.
Yes, I'll repeat. Why
yes.
some countries are virtually migrant nations?
Yes, we have the case of countries where there are multi-ethnic diasporas. So they have that particular historicity. They have their individual historical experience where, as we know, in the Caribbean, especially when we see the area of Trinidad and Tobago, and this is an area that I've studied much, so I prefer to talk about this. The indigenous populations, we do not know where they are. We do not know how they were exterminated, what happened to them. And all the population, the multi-ethnic communities that are there, whether African, Chinese, Spanish, English, are all diasporas. So here you have the case of an entire nation state that comprises of multi-ethnic diaspora communities. And if we look at such pockets, we find that they are fraught with violence, ethnic violence, and one ethnic group posited against the other, and all sharing equally the social and political chaos, so to say. But then, in the modern term, when a modern person, so to say, when I say modern, Father, I would mean that a person who has developed a post-enlightenment way of life and has been, is in tune with the idea of thinking in a logical, rational paradigm, or at least professing to do so, the person goes with a certain idea and with the coming of globalization, after having explored the role that the person is going to take on there and stays on. The same cannot be true for the still, even in the present state, the hapless communities of, say, the illiterate Sikh community, who are often found on the wrong side of the law. So that is a big difference. These multi-ethnic diaspora communities have their own experiences, which come together and fall apart. So the social fabric is always in a state of being made and unmade, so to say. Thank you for
We have another question, that is, where do we fix the position of displaced people within India and diaspora context? Question by Dr. Anthony Swami.
The position of displaced people within India and outside, and in the diasporic communities. Now, see, within India, we have to see one important paradigm here. Suppose I talk about the diasporic Marwadi community in Kolkata. Now, what would make me use this particular term for the diasporic Marwari community in Kolkata, which has now no roots in the home origin, that is in Rajasthan or in the particular Marwar region. And the only home that they know is the city of Kolkata. They speak a mixed language. and many of them have lost their mother language. So it cannot be, it is very much possible that within the boundaries of the nation state, diasporas belonging to the same nation state can exist. And here, what comes to our rescue, Doctor, is the new formulation. The new formulation of diaspora that does not draw upon geographical boundaries or political boundaries or the idea of a fixed place. So in the absence of geographical boundary of the within the nation state, we can have a movement which is characterized only by the experience. And what is the experience of the diaspora Marwadi community in Kolkata is very much the same. The forging of roots in a hostile soil, making way in a differently cultured society, trying to stay there, eke out a living, and grow roots. There is no difference to my mind, Doctor, between the paradigms or the classification of the diaspora within not only India, any other political boundary or geographical boundary. It is the essence of the experience that is of paramount importance while classifying a particular individual or community as diasporic.
One more question, ma'am. What is the role of diasporic theory on culture, and what is the difference between diasporic writers and resident writers? Question by Sujata Shahu.
Sure. Now, there is a old tendency to classify writers on the basis of their genres, on the basis of the languages in which they write, on the basis of their geographical locations. But I think all writers, they share a love for the word, a love for the narration, be it from any position, any location, any perspective, in any language, in any country. It should be looked at as literature. So suppose for me, the work of Bakhtin helps me, suppose, to understand a particular, say, Hindi text. I would not reject it as being inappropriate theoretical framework on the basis of it not being rooted in the, you can say, Indian scenario, or on the basis of it belonging to a different theoretical domain. So when we talk about diaspora theory and cultural theory, we find that they heavily draw upon each other. If someone would compel me to posit one as a subset of the other, I would posit diaspora theory within the subset or the larger rubric of the culture theory. Naturally, culture is of paramount importance that defines the way we form our imaginaries, the way we conceive of ourselves in the diaspora, the way we respond. Thank you, ma'am, for this question.
Okay, ma'am. The last question is from Dr. Vasugi. When we talk about the disparity in identity in relation to a nation and nationalism, then we cannot claim an identity at all. What is your opinion?
Yes, this is what Slavoj Žižek talks about, Professor Vasuki. He says that when we clamor for a national identity, each one of us who are the subjects of a nation state call for it from our own positions. So Benedict Anderson also says that it's not that we are striving for a national identity. We should see from which position we are seeking it and what it has to offer for each one. Now, if we say that we must have a singular, composite and a non-plural national identity, there would be it would be a highly coercive nation state where I think there would be no space for any plurality. And there would be a jostling among the groups of attempting to prove, as we witness in present times, that who is more national than the other. So it's not a question of national identity being extended by the nation state to its subjects. It's often the subjects of the nation state that attempt to create this national identity, or in the words of Slavoj Žižek, that nation thing. And that nation thing is derived from an idea of what enjoyment they want for themselves, what attributes they want for themselves, how would they like to see themselves. This entire talk of going back in history, destroying buildings, making buildings, and aligning and realigning things is not an assertion to my mind of or correction of history. A person cannot go back in time and take the modern paradigm into the past and attempt to correct it and then bring that discourse into the nation state. For example, and of course, at the onset, I would like to beg pardon from anyone. My intention again is only to speak in literary terms and not, speak about religion and such things on this esteemed forum. But the danger is in taking the present day rubrics and applying them retrospectively across history to create the idea of a nation. For example, would it not be extremely ludicrous if we would take the present day formulations of feminism and female identity, female self-dignity, to the historical, much revered characters and fault them with being polygamous historically? That would be ludicrous. That would be entirely not valid, irrational. In the same way, the rubrics of nationalism are seldom created by the agency of the nation state, and more often by its subjects in an attempt to see themselves in positions in which they are not, and in positions in which they see themselves as being enjoying recipients of privileges. Moreover, they fault their present lack of privileges to the others whom they assume have snatched away these privileges from them. So it is very, very necessary to have a plurality, a space for plurality in the idea of nationhood, and it is very much possible. India is a prime example of plurality in all cultural practices, where even not an atheist is an acceptable is seen to practice an acceptable kind of Hinduism. So it is this kind of plurality, and of course not to advocate Hinduism or any other religion on this platform, but nation states must retain the plurality of individual and community-based imaginaries, socio-cultural imaginaries. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for answering the questions patiently. Now it's time to propose the vote of thanks. Ma'am, you have thrown insights into the theory of diasporic imaginary and the practice of it. Thank you for giving historical evidence and the disparity in pragmatic difficulty in practicing diaspora. You have also stated that mind is a mixture of the imaginary, symbolic, and real. You have touched upon the diaspora of many countries and have related to the socio-psychological theory. Thank you, ma'am. I assure you that your lecture will truly enkindle the spirit of research among our students. Your ideas are highly informative and interesting. Once again, I thank you, ma'am. I extend my heartfelt thanks to the technicians and the organizers of this program who made this 5-day international conference a grand success. Thank you, one and all.
I thank you, Professor Bharti, and my sincere thanks to all the esteemed scholars on this platform, and especially to the organizers for having privileged me with this opportunity to present my thoughts on this wonderful 5-day virtual international webinar. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Announcement to the participants and paper presenters of IVC 2020. All participants and paper presenters kindly submit the feedback form and confirmation form, which we will be made available to you in your registered email ID at the end of the valedictory. The next announcement is, for the kind attention of the paper presenters, a confirmation form for the paper presenters will be sent to your registered email ID by today. To collect your details and the title of your paper of the certificates, kindly take care to furnish your exact details as you would like it to appear on the certificate. I repeat, kindly take care to furnish your exact details as you would like it to appear on the certificate. Remember, we will not be editing your details. The third announcement is, during the valedictory, we shall be speaking to you about the paper publication and certificates. Thank you. Now I hand over the session to Anto Maria Izobia.
Thank you, ma'am, for having wonderfully moderated the first session. Respected organizers, esteemed resource person of the second session, Dr. Ravi Bhushan, Associate Professor of English, Bharatpur Singh, Mahila Vishwavidyalaya, Kanpur Kalan, Haryana, India, and our vibrant participants, happy morning. I am Ms. U. Anto Maria Izobia, Assistant Professor of English, Secondary College, Tirupattur. It's indeed my delight to be the moderator of this session on autonomous learner, paradigms of English language learning. According to Scott Hayden, teachers have 3 loves: love of learning, love of learners, and the love of bringing the first 2 loves together. Yes, an ardent teacher is the one who creates autonomous, independent, and self-directed learners. Successful learners create their own learning pathways, and effective teachers seek to recognize learners' needs and preferences. They help them to acquire effective learning strategies and to build a focus on the learner into the lessons. Hence, in order to make the learning more personal and focused, one needs to know the paradigms of English language learning with reference to autonomous learner. To enlighten us on this significant topic, we have an erudite personality, Dr. Ravi Bhushan. Sir is an alumnus of Madras University. He teaches English language and literature at Bharatpur Singh Mahila Vishwavidyalaya, Kanpur Kalan, Haryana. He has authored a book on William Golding and co-edited 2 books, namely Affinities, India and Korea, Past and Present, and Mekong-Ganga Axis. Dr. Ravi Bhushan has also translated a book on languages of Haryana, published by Orient Blacksburn. His areas of interest are English language teaching, cognitive semantics, communication theories, and oral literatures. Dear sir, it's indeed a great pleasure to have you here on this fabulous day. Without further ado, we will turn the time over to our respected resource person, Dr. Ravi Bhushan. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Izobia. Thank you so much for saying wonderful words about me. Am I audible to all? Dr. Izobia, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Please go on.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Izobia. And my heartiest congratulations to the previous speaker, Dr. Namrata, for delivering an excellent talk on diaspora studies. Now, respected learned friends, in fact, you know, the crux of my paper has already been conveyed to you by Dr. Izobia, right? But anyhow, she introduced me. The best part of my introduction, I have kept it to myself to share with you. My 12.5 years of service with Indian Air Force, in fact, made me to ponder over the concept of language learning and language teaching. During my stint with Indian Air Force, I think I learned to be an autonomous learner, especially in the context of motivation and exposure of a learner to the target language. So I owe everything to my stint with Indian Air Force, being in the non-commissioned ranks from 1991 to 2004, because the reflections of my stint with Air Force have been, you can say, listed, have been talked about in my paper, which I'm going to share with you. Now, the question of effective English language teaching or learning has been argued and debated a number of times through conferences, academic researches, and policy papers. But the quest for an appropriate answer persists. In fact, can there be a unanimously accepted answer to the question? I think there cannot be a unanimously accepted answer. What is the best method to teach language, and especially English language? So I'm neither the first person or the first one, nor the last person to talk about effective English language teaching or learning. And please remember, my paper is in the context of India. That means I'm going to talk about Indian learner per se. However, with my little experience and understanding as a teacher of English language, the following views are being shared for your consideration and contemplation. Now, before I start talking about English language teaching and English language learning, I would like to preface my paper with the present crisis of COVID. Now, any existential crisis of huge magnitude like COVID-19, I think it brings about certain paradigm shifts in human behavior and experience. COVID-19, I think, will leave us with few positive outcomes. I call them positive outcomes because they will give us chance to reform and evolve ourselves. The first could be society-centric life, responsible, eco-friendly progress. And third one would be ICT or digital-driven educational systems. Now, these post-COVID outcomes are to be analyzed in the light of the transitional paradigms of India's growth as a nation. Means I wish to talk about few drivers of transition which will take India to the next level of growth and development. Those drivers could be, one is the demographic dividend. As you all are aware that we have the maximum number of young people who can be part of the working population or the workforce. But there is a rider to it. This demographic dividend can turn into demographic disaster if the young population is not rightly skilled or rightly oriented. The second driver could be service sector oriented economy. That means from agrarian to the service sector oriented economy. The third one is multilinguality and multiculturality. These are two strengths of India as a nation. Fourth is the educational, social, and professional mobility through information communication technology and using English as a second language for Indian young learners or young population. You may be wondering what is the relation of these drivers of transition and English studies, of which English language teaching is an important branch. Now, the relation is quite simple. Now, the nature, scope, and methodology of English language teaching in Indian context are to align with the stated paradigms of change. The drivers which I talked about as far as India is concerned, I think English studies or English language teaching, I think the nature, scope, and methodology must align with these drivers of change. Now, the cumulative outcome of all the stated paradigms comes out to be student centricity. That means if we talk about all these drivers of change, who is at the center? I think the student, the learner is at the center. As I said, I'm not the first one to talk about learner centricity or student centricity. But I think, let me reiterate that because of some reasons, student at times or most of the time is forced at the periphery, and other stakeholders of teaching learning process, they come and take the central position. I'm only advocating, please bring back learner to the center and let others be at the periphery so that we take care of the learner. And student centricity is the most, you can say, this is the moot point of discussion. Now, repositioning the learner in the center and deciding and defining all other parameters of learning accordingly. I think that is the conceptual point of discussion in my paper, which has been titled as Autonomous Learner Paradigms of ELL. I'm using ELL for two definitions: effective language learning and English language learning. Now, since ICT and English language are the two main agents of change as far as the Indian youth is concerned, that means technology, inevitable part of our life, and second is the English. These are the two main catalysts, or you can say agents of change as far as our youth is concerned. We need to understand the dynamics of English language teaching or English language learning by having learner in the center. So my focus is going to be primarily on three key words in my paper. First one is language. Second one is learning. And third one is learner. So three L's. First, to talk about language. Now, Dr. Izobia read in my introduction that I'm interested in studying cognitive semantics. That means I'm interested in the area of language and thought. What is the relationship between language and thought? So that's basically, you can say, the central part of my paper. And I look at language like thought, the most enigmatic and mysterious entity to be defined. I think the most mundane definition of language, which we all offer, is that it is a medium of communication. Language is not only the medium of communication, it is much more than that. Language is a cultural product. It is a repository of heritage and indigenous knowledge systems of any community. And it is an instrument of thought. Now, so look at the definition of language, because that will, you can say, decide and define the dynamics of teaching English in the classrooms. If I look at English only as a medium of communication, I think I'm negating the central aspect of being a language, which is, you can say, it's a cultural product, and it represents our cultural heritage, and most importantly, it's an instrument of thought. In fact, the relationship between language and thought has been studied with great philosophical inquisitiveness by philosophers and grammarians. For example, Bhartari in the 5th century, the most famous grammarian of Indian origin, who wrote the book Vakyapadya, the excellent book on, you can say, grammar. You can go for the translated version of Vakyapadya by Dr. Pillai. And Ludwig Wittgenstein, that Austrian philosopher, Vygotsky, Russian philosopher, Adi Shankaracharya, our own Shankaracharya, and Noam Chomsky. I think these are the people who have talked about the relationship of language with thought. Now, the primary point which I wish to convey by such understanding of language is that teaching of any language, including English, cannot be effective by treating language merely a medium of communication. Rather, as I said earlier, language is an instrument of thinking. Bhartari, in fact, has said, he has gone on record by saying, Sarvena Shabdena Bhashyate, which means we take cognizance of the world through word. Word represents language. So word is world. In fact, there is a beautiful book by B.K. Matilal on the same title, The Word and the World. That means we take cognizance of the world through language. So that, language is so important for us. In fact, learners learns language through his or her world and vice versa. Let me quote even Taittiriya Upanishad, our great, you can say, scholarly texts on Indian philosophy and literature and language. Taittiriya Upanishad says, I'll say it in Hindi and then I'll translate. It says, भाषा विचारों की जननी है और विचार भाषा के जनक हैं. That means language is the mother of thoughts and ideas, but at the same time thoughts are the father or parents of language. That's what the paradoxical relationship is between language and thought. As teachers, I think we need to explore this kind of a relationship if we wish to turn our learners into thoughtful learners, if we wish to turn them into, you can say, who can go for a contrastive thinking. Please mark my word, contrastive thinking. It's very, very important as far as learning or teaching of any language is concerned. Russian philosopher Vygotsky, he has said language is a tool for thinking. Language and thought initially are separate but become interdependent during an act of communication. We all talk about communication, or you can say communicative theories. After all, what is communication? Basically, this is what Vygotsky is trying to say. During communication, thought and language, they become interdependent. Even abstract thinking. What is abstract thinking? Means the subjective experience of a learner. That is what abstract thinking is. And in fact, this subjective experience is the schemata of a learner, right? To learn a language. Now, this subjective experience is possible because of language. You may agree or disagree with me. I'm not saying that you should agree with me, but my vision is, my understanding is that the subjective experience, which is so important for a learner to learn a language and to use it, I think this is all possible through language. Moreover, why should we forget the old proverb which says, tongue is ordained to speak our mind. Tongue is ordained to speak our mind. So for effective English language teaching or learning, the reciprocal relationship of language and thinking has to be viewed as one of the pedagogical steps as far as English language teaching is concerned. Let me quote evolutionary biologist Mark Pagel. Is from University of Readings from United Kingdom. Pagel defines language as genes talking. That means voice of the genes, because he's a biologist. So he says language is voice of the genes. He says that language is the most powerful neuro-audio technology. See, we all are talking about technology. My understanding is, maybe I am a rudimentary traditional person, technologies will come and go. No permanent technology is going to stay there forever. They will come and go. But our own technology of subjective experience, our own technology of our memory, our own technology of our insight, I think these forms of technology are going to be there forever. We teachers need to explore these technologies and inculcate in the students to understand what they have with them. And I think Pagel says we use this technology, neuro-audio technology, which he uses for language, to read people's mind. Hence, language learning is a psychological process. At the same time, language is a form of social technology as well, using which people cooperate. This element of cooperation, which is so central to society, people use language to cooperate. So explore this kind of possibility, this sociological aspect of language teaching and learning. Anthropologically also, language is a result of cumulative cultural adaptation. As I said in the beginning, language is a cultural product. I think anthropologically also this has been proved. So you may agree that one of the reasons to have a unique language, now I'm saying it in a different context, that all traditional societies, they have their unique language. Have you ever given it a thought, why do they have their unique language? One of the reasons could be maybe they wanted to keep their knowledge systems, they wanted to have their knowledge paradigms within themselves without being encroached by others. That could be one of the reasons for having unique language for unique communities. But again, that comes back to the idea of language and thought. Now, effective English language learning has to consider these three aspects of language: psychological, social, and anthropological perspectives. Practically speaking, learners learn languages through social learning, now through imitation and building on wisdom of others. So social learning is a potent paradigm of English language learning. I'll repeat, social learning is one of the key paradigms of English language learning. Hence, to reiterate my own point, language is not merely a medium, rather it is the meaning. I'm bringing in the binary of medium and meaning. In fact, I presented a paper at Namrata's University where I said medium as hero with a question mark. There I wanted to say that medium has overtaken the essence of life and meaning has gone to the backside. I wish to bring in meaning in the center and medium at the periphery. Right? So language is not merely a medium, rather it is the meaning, because language and thought are the two sides of the same coin. I think it's quite clear that English language learning is about creating thoughtful learners, because thought as schemata will coax them to learn and ultimately use a second language as he or she does in case of his or her first language. So far, I have tried to put the essence of language and its expanded definition in perspective. Now, let us understand what learning is. That means in maybe the first part of my paper, I have talked about what language is. That's my understanding of what language is. The second word of my paper is learning. And in fact, about learning, Dr. Yashmin has talked about learning. So maybe I have a few common points to share. Now, learning, because it is a psychological attribute like motivation, cognition, thinking, interest, it can be defined as acronym ASK. Now, ASK means if there is a positive change in attitude of the learner, if there is a positive change in the skill of the learner, and if there is a positive change in the knowledge of the learner, I think the learner is learning. Learning is taking place if there is a positive change in ASK. John Dewey, famous philosopher, in fact, he has written a beautiful book, How We Think. He says, learning involves thinking. David Cole, he also says that transformation through experience is learning. So if there is a positive transformation through learning, then through experience, I think learning is taking place. So learning refers to modification and adaptation of learners to their environment, and it is a result of experience and practice. So the element of environment comes into picture. So, but learning is not like the biological concepts of maturation and growth. It is different from these biological processes. So effective language learning, I think primarily there are two schools of thought. There may be more, but I'm referring to only two schools of thought as far as learning is concerned. The first school is, in fact, I'm using the binary of nurture and nature. I think those who are into language teaching and those who understand learning theories, they know this boundary of nurture and nature. Now, nurture refers to the environmentalist view. That means Pavlov's conditioning, Watson's behaviorism, Thorndike's connectionism, Skinner's operant conditioning. These are a few examples of this environmentalist view, which refers to nurture perspective. That means they are based on the simple framework of SR. S stands for, as you understand, stands for specific stimuli, and R stands for, you can say, observable response. So this view is based on SR principle. The second view, which is of interest to me, that is the cognitivist view, which refers to the nature perspective. That means based on Gestalt psychological perspective, which is a German psychological theory. If I'm pronouncing the word correctly, I may be wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Gestalt theory basically talks about perception and cognition of the learner. Now, this cognitivist view talks about the innate organizing principles like cognition and perception of the learner. Here, the subjective experience. And what is the second name for subjective experience? It is the insight, the most powerful, you can say, intellectual trait with us, insight. Now, this insight of a learner is, you can say, important as far as learning a language is concerned. The meaningful learning is the objective here, and meaning is, please mark my words, meaning is not understood as a behavioral response. Meaning is not a behavioral response. Rather, meaning is clearly articulated conscious experience of a learner. That is what meaning is. So this learning, language learning theory, which is also referred as nativist's perspective or nativist's view, as Chomsky maybe gave this term. And it has been recommended by Noam Chomsky as an effective strategy. In fact, Chomsky has gone on record and he said that language learning is a biological process, whereas environmental or environmentalist view, it considers language learning as a result of learners' mental development because of social environment. Now, by this time, maybe I have confused you. Maybe you have a lot of questions in your mind that in a way, I'm negating this environmentalist view and I'm focusing more on this, you can say, psychological or this nativist perspective. But I think effective language learning is a result of juxtaposition of both nurture and nature, because language growth and mental development. Now, mental development is defined as intelligence of a learner. So language growth and mental development are related concepts. That's why Jean Piaget, the famous philosopher, he said that functional use of language indicates mental development. That means functional use of language will also indicate the mental development or the intelligence of the learner as well. Even the Sapir-Whorfian hypothesis, it also asserts that language has a formative influence on perception and cognition. Now we know the process of language learning is to form associations by associating words with thoughts, ideas, actions, and events. That's what knowing a language means making associations through words. Learning a living language involves maximum associated moment, which results out of unselected experiences of learners. That means unselected experiences of learners will form the basis of effective language learning. Chomsky, once again, he has asserted that competence, because the concept of competence and performance, which was given by Chomsky, and where he referred to competence as the tacit knowledge with the learner. It helps a learner to perform well. So effective language learning means knowing and using a language where use is influenced by knowledge of that particular language. So if a question is asked, what do you mean by knowing a language? And I think this question must be asked to ourselves. What do you mean by knowing a language? I think answer could be, you may have your answer, but I'll share my answer. It could be having three kinds of competences. Linguistic competence, of course, essential, which refers to, you can say, formal and semantic features of a language. Communicative competence, which refers to the intuitive knowledge of social, functional, and contextual factors. In fact, that's what him said. And third one is creative use of language, which is very, very important. If these three things are there in a learner, or if these three things are inculcated, I think we can say that somebody knows a language. Now, the last two parameters of knowing a language, that is communicative competence and creative use of language, they can be made faster, can be made effective through the process of acculturation. Even in diaspora, this term is quite often used, acculturation, but I'm using it for language learning purposes. And the term given by Schumann, acculturation means social and psychological integration of a learner with the target language context. I'll repeat, acculturation is social and psychological integration of a learner with the target language context. Now, how do you do that? That's a different question. So the moot question is, why does, now I'm coming to the moot question, which is a very old question, especially Indian context. Why does English language teaching or effective English language teaching fail, particularly in Indian context? So I'm going to share maybe, maybe few reasons why English language teaching has failed or it fails as far as Indian context is concerned. And in fact, it's not me. I think all of you who are listening to me, you can cite number of reasons for failure or barriers to effective English language teaching or learning. Maybe I'll repeat some of your reasons, but to me, following four reasons are really important to ponder over. The first one is, we like treating language teaching or language learning like any other school or college subject, rather than treating language as a social act, right? That's the first reason. Second is losing sight of the main objective, that is to learn a language. Third is ignoring the natural process of language learning. One of the speakers, I think the esteemed speaker from Zambia referred to, I think Professor Chawla or somebody, I don't remember the name, but somebody did refer to this natural process of language learning. Basically, this process says that language learning is a subsidiary, unconscious activity. In fact, I raised this question to the speaker also. What is this subsidiary, unconscious activity? And the fourth point, which is important, unexplored texts and contexts from a learner's first language. In fact, the first language of the learner is an excellent resource for effective English language teaching or learning. Now, these four barriers, according to me, they are besides quite often repeated barriers, and those repeated barriers are faulty pedagogy, faulty curriculum, and faulty assessment processes. Now, they are well known. So I have just gone beyond those three, you can say, quite often said reasons to these four stated barriers. So, in fact, George Tickner, in one of his Harvard lectures, and the lecture was on the best methods of teaching living languages. This was in 1832. So he insisted on treating language as speech and said that there is no one method of teaching languages. Rather, two traits of a learner, that is age and attainments. So AA, age and attainments of learners will decide the method suitable to him or her. So, but to be, just to have a referral point, I think natural process of learning languages can be, you can say, a source of great help to us. In fact, what is this natural process? It basically says that a learner is compelled to acquire the speech used around him. And since I talked about my previous stint with the Air Force, so wherever we were posted, we were forced to learn that language because we were surrounded by that particular language. Maybe that was an Indian language. And my stint in, you can say, Tamil Nadu forced us to learn English language because we were surrounded by English language. And grammar means translation and grammar. They are kept outside the natural process, right? Third is importance of particular physical environment is not emphasized. This is you may disagree with this point, that no emphasis is given on physical environment. Basically, physical environment means the paraphernalia, including technology. I have a wonderful language laboratory in my university. Dr. Sujata Menon is a witness to it. But if I don't have a competent teacher with me, if I don't have this ambience of English, mere computer and the software will not help me, right? So physical environment is not the sole, you can say, reason for learning a language. So this natural process rejects great emphasis on physical environment, because if the sole medium of communication is the target language, learners will learn it. And most important point of this process is, see, in natural process, you have many teachers for one learner. Who are these teachers? The parents, the society, the peer group, or maybe other members of the family. So there are many teachers for one learner, whereas in a formal process of language learning, maybe in a structured process of language learning, maybe in a classroom, one teacher for many learners. And in my case, one teacher for 100 students in the classroom. So complete contradiction of the two processes. So I would like to quote Professor Shirish Chaudhary, the former professor of English at IIT Madras. He says that language learning, including English language learning, is inevitable as far as exposure, motivation, and aptitude are there. And please remember, learner's mother tongue does not hinder second language acquisition. So exposure, motivation, and aptitude, these three things are extremely, extremely important. Even the famous and the eminent, revered by everybody, linguist Dr. N.S. Prabhu, he also says that comprehension and production are signs of effective language learning. That means he also emphasizes on comprehension. Thinking learners who think and understand language and then produce it. I think these are the two markers of effective language learning: comprehension and, you can say, production. I think natural process and the cognitive view which I referred to, they can corroborate the views of these two scholars, Professor Chaudhary and Dr. N.S. Prabhu. So I've been talking about learning so far. The third key word, which is important to discuss, is the learner, right? So as far as if learning is ASK, that means change in positive attitude and positive skill and positive knowledge, I think a learner is one who struggles to bring about this positive change in ASK. So there has to be struggle on the part of learner to bring about this change in ASK. And this is possible only and only if there is a sustainable motivation and interest on the part of the learner. Otherwise, any type or any kind of physical environment is not going to work if motivation, which is sustainable, and interest is there. So I think in our classes, we all teachers, you may agree with me, we primarily face 4 types of learners. I have categorized learners into 4 types. They are original and talkative. That is the first type. Second type is original but hesitant. Third, talkative but unoriginal. And the fourth one is unoriginal and uncommunicative. These are basically 4 types of learners we encounter or face in our classrooms. Now, type 1 and 3, they are, since they are talkative, so as teachers, we need to check them. Type 2, since they are shy, so they need to be encouraged on every occasion. And type 4, they learn by repeating ideas of teachers and peers. So we can devise our strategies depending on these 4 types of learners. It's not possible to apply one method to all the 4 types of learners. However, I think the common and the crucial learner factor is motivation, which is common to all 4 types. And since motivation is a psychological trait, I am of the firm opinion that learners' motivation will depend on teachers' motivation to teach. So teachers' motivation to teach will ultimately decide sustainable motivation of a learner to learn. So when I talk of autonomous learner, I'm not saying teacher is resented. In fact, the responsibility of the teacher becomes more. He has to exhibit very, very honestly that zeal and that motivation to teach. Then only learners will, you can say, learn. And in fact, learners' motivation, it's of basically 2 types. You may know these 2 types. One is that you can say instrumental motivation, and second is that integrative motivation, or extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. The role of a language teacher is to develop this intrinsic motivation, this integrative motivation. There lies the challenge. And the teacher has to bridge the gap between learner's mind and material to be learned. That means learner's psychological schemata and the material to be learned by the learner. A teacher has to bridge the gap between these 2. And this is possible by adopting learner-friendly strategies. Now, second point where the role of a teacher becomes very, very important. You all may agree with me that over-teaching and under-teaching, these are the 2 problems as far as language teaching is concerned. Over-teaching and under-teaching. You may recollect that redundancy and entropy, these are the 2 features of language as far as communication is concerned. At times, we need to be redundant, and at times we need to be entropical. Entropical basically means when you withhold some information yourself with yourself and leave it to the listener to guess and imagine what you want to say. Same is the case here. Over-teaching and under-teaching. I think as teachers, we must remember that thoroughness or over-teaching in one dose means giving the entire medicine in one dose. I think that's a great barrier to effective language teaching. Why do we forget that brevity is, you can say, the cardinal principle of language learning and language teaching. So let's be not to practice over teaching. Under teaching at times may work, but over teaching, I think, will destroy that motivation to learn. So I think because over teaching turns into pedantry, And I think pedantry will not be appreciated by our learner. So let's try to have that integrative motivation in ourselves as well as learners. This is possible, in fact, with, I'm using another acronym here, CAR. Now, competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Using this acronym of CAR, competence, autonomy, and relatedness, I think that students' motivation can be kept going and can be kept alive. Also, I think 3 C's are important here as far as learners' attitude is concerned. These 3 C's are curiosity, creativity, and comprehension. Curiosity, creativity, and comprehension. I think I would like to refer to Greek mythology here. In fact, Greeks believe that wonder is the mother of thought. Greeks believe that wonder is the mother of thought, and thoughtful creativity is the parent of speech. Look at the relationship. Wonder leads to thought, and thought leads to speech. Can we adopt this sequence of learning and teaching in our classrooms? Can we create that wonder and thoughtful creative activities in English language teaching classrooms so that speech takes place? Speech means that communication aspect of a learner takes place. So let us have those wonderful activities so that there is thought in the classroom. Along with learner, I would like to also talk about, because that's the basic, you can say the primary word in my title, autonomous learner, right? I know that those who are into this area of language teaching and language learning, they know what learner autonomy is. See, I'm not here to define what learner autonomy is. I just want to say that learner autonomy is not anti-teacher. It is not against teacher. Since I teach in a university which is situated in North India, maybe ELT, I can talk of my university, is not, you can say, taken very seriously as far as language learning or English language is concerned, and focus shifts somehow to literature and literary theories. Now, maybe such people may very sarcastically define learner autonomy as anti-teacher or making teacher redundant. Please understand, learner autonomy is not absence of a teacher. It basically means self, somewhere making learner independent, making learner more creative, making learner an independent thinker. Now, in order to make a learner independent thinker, in order to make him or her creative, don't you think role of a teacher is paramount? I think teachers' encouragement at every step, teachers' intervention, or maybe teachers' contribution at every step would, in fact, prompt a learner to become an autonomous learner. So that's my understanding of learner autonomy and not minus teacher. In fact, it enables a learner to develop psychological relation to the process and content of learning. So learner autonomy is exhibited by a learner by transferring his or her learning to the wider context. Now, the wider context is the world. If a learner can exhibit his or her learning in the wider context, I think he or she has become an autonomous learner. And as teachers, I think that's our ultimate aim, to make our students to express themselves independently in the actual real outside world. So I think I take learner autonomy that way. Father of learner autonomy, Henry Hole, he has also, defined learner autonomy by saying learner autonomy is deinstitutionalization of language learning from a teacher to the learner. Deinstitutionalization. See, there are number of words used for a teacher, synonyms like facilitator, like scaffolder, like helper, maybe enabler, many. Now people may come back and say, if teacher is not king of the classroom, who else will be, right? It's not about this power equation. Only point is, let us deinstitutionalize. Let us give more chance to the learner to think, to learn, and to express in the external context. I think that's a good definition by father of learner autonomy, Henry Hole. So we teachers need to, really practice this type of learner autonomy in the classroom. So to me, an autonomous learner is one, that's my understanding of a learner, who is a critical thinker, number one. Number two, who is a pragmatist. And number three, who is competent. I have already defined critical thinking and competence, or to be competent. Now the second word, pragmatism. What is being pragmatist? See, generally questions asked by students are, why so and so is this way, or why such and such principle or concept is this way, right? My point is, an autonomous learner will not accept a concept as it is given to him or her. A pragmatist learner would raise a question and say, what are the practical implications or practical perspectives of a particular concept being discussed with him or her? So raising this kind of questions, I think would make, you can say, a learner more pragmatist. John Dewey, again in his book, How We Think, he says a pragmatist person is more capable of dealing with uncertainties. So if we inculcate this habit of being a pragmatist, I think our learners will be more, you can say, competent to handle, you can say, these uncertain, or you can say unpredictable situations. I'm relating it with communicative language teaching, which says that you can say, to be able to talk in unpredictable and you can say natural situations. So I think if a learner starts thinking, and if we enable him or her to be a pragmatist, would ultimately help him becoming a communicative, competent learner. Now, I have defined 3 words. I know that there is limited time with me. I'm going to share few paradigms, few models of English language learning and teaching, which may help you in your classrooms, right? Some of you, or most of you, may be aware of these paradigms, but let me reiterate, let me share with you. First one is dogme ELT, D-O-G-M-E, dogme. Correct me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, dogme ELT. Now, originally given by Scott Thornbury, this dogme ELT recommends abandoning of course books while teaching language, a radical step. How can an Indian teacher in Indian setup accept abandoned textbooks, right? We need to take it in a slightly different context. Nobody is saying that tomorrow go to the principal and say that I'm not going to use the books prescribed by the education board or the books prescribed by the university. Not that way. Have them, but can we have something of our own? Can we contextualize our understanding and activities with the prescribed curriculum or the prescribed textbooks? Rather, language is learned through interaction, and target language emerges from the learner's intellect. Again, I'm going back to the learner. This theory says learners intellect. What is this learner's intellect? This is needs and concerns of the learner. That means the text here becomes needs and concerns of the learner. Turn them into texts and use them as texts in the classroom. That's what Thornbury means when he says abandon prescribed textbooks. Even our own Indian scholar, maybe I think he teaches somewhere in some foreign university, but a well-known name in ELT, Kumaravadi, he also in fact agrees with Thornbury and says that ELT without material, means prescribed structured material, would facilitate building more socially responsible and transformative pedagogical practices. Now, it is more of an experiential learning. That means learning from the experience of the learner. So who becomes the resource here? The learner becomes the resource, not the prescribed textbook becomes the resource. So this dogma ELT is a kind of a scaffolding approach in which learner is the primary resource for a language to learn. And conversational exercises which emerge out of learners' needs and concerns, in fact, they are the process as well as the product of the entire process of language teaching. Means conversational exercises, they are the process as well as the product also. Now, the second paradigm, the second example which I wish to share is philosophy-based language teaching, PBLT. Please do not be dissuaded by the word philosophy here. I'm not asking you to use that complex philosophy in the classroom to teach language. It basically means that any language classroom must be treated as a holistic classroom, and it's a social community. That means classroom becomes a social community. And this approach allows a learner to use language for imagination, manipulation, and create new ideas. Language is used like a mental tool and is used by each member to think. So again, focus shifts to thinking. This approach is similar to what Russian philosopher Vygotsky has said: learning is a social and constructivist activity. That means it is a social and construction activity, and it is used to think. So this approach, I think, can really help students to think critically and creatively. Okay, means they think creatively. Now, few examples which can be used to instigate this kind of thinking. They could be, have subjects like life, like reality, like beauty, like democracy, like justice, like art, death, love, God, language, and most importantly, truth. In a way, what this approach is trying to say, that one of the genres of ELT or one of the genres of language learning, teaching language through literature. These are literary subjects. These are subjective subjects. Can we use them as far as language learning is concerned? Because they will force a learner to think and ultimately help him to speak and use thinking in a positive manner. So role of a language teacher in PBLT approach is that of a co-enquirer. Teacher acts here like a co-enquirer who asks open-ended questions in the class, who offers alternative views, and who seeks clarifications and reasons from the learners on the given aspects so that their perception, you can say, develops. So that was the second example. Third example, it's a very, very real life example, SLS, same language subtitling. This is the full form of SLS. I think we all agree that reading is very, very important to become an autonomous learner. And most of our learners, they lack, I know about my learners, maybe I'm not generalizing it, but most of my learners, they lack good reading habits. They don't go for original, exhaustive reading on the given subjects. So I think reading, if reading is improved, in fact, reading is the mother of all other skills of language. this approach SLS, it can help. In fact, this SLS is a startup kind of a program. It was launched by IIM Ahmedabad, where few entrepreneurs, they took this as a project, and they said that whatever content is consumed on television and OTT, that means over the top. Since I'm not a great user of technology, I may not be aware what OTT is, but I understand what OTT is. I think most of the material on social media and people which watch, maybe including Netflix, I think this is all known as OTT. So this content consumption on TV and OTT, if this has this SLS, same language subtitling on the screen, and so this helps people to improve their reading habits, right? So SLS can work because most of our young learners, they are techno savvy and great users of social media and OTT platform. So I think can be used. Another model which was propounded by Professor N. Krishnaswamy, I'm just repeating his model, former professor at CIFL Hyderabad, he came up with this idea of Vikas. In fact, one of his articles was published in Journal of ELTIF, ELTIF, and there he talks about idea of VICAS. V stands for vocationally useful. I stands for intellectually challenging. C stands for culturally appropriate. A stands for aesthetically appealing. And S stands for socially acceptable. Now, in fact, this is the definition of an autonomous learner. So this model of Vikas, as teachers of English language, can we do something? Can we contribute ourselves, our part, to have this Vikas kind of a learner, right? Now, the last example, last paradigm, where in fact, I have great interest is the indigenous model, right? Now, I'm of the firm opinion that Eurocentric model be replaced with indigenous model, having native texts and contexts as part of resource pool for effective English language teaching. Now, in order to understand the need for this shift from Eurocentric to indigenous centric model of effective English language teaching, we need to go back to the history of introduction of English education in India. And I think it's known to you, the Act of 1835, English Education Act, where the famous or infamous Macaulay's minutes, and there Macaulay says, I quote, a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature in India and Arabia, unquote. Now, this type of mindset indicates intrinsic superiority of the Western literature, which is incorrect and unacceptable. Now, this embedded superiority of race and literature and culture, in my opinion, affects language learning and language teaching also. Please read Language Death, a beautiful book by David Crystal, British linguist. David Crystal, he says, if you want to destroy and kill a language, then start demeaning its users through their culture and literature. So even Crystal is recommending that this intrinsic superiority mindset for a particular language will not help as far as learning that language is concerned. So I think this has happened, and this kind of a thing has happened to many Indian rich indigenous languages. I have been associated with Bhasha project, Bhasha project is a People's Linguistic Survey of India project by Honorable Professor Ganesh Devi, the former professor at Baroda University. And as part of his project, we did a work on languages of Haryana, which people call them as dialects. I refuse to accept this binary of language and dialect, right? Because dialects carry much more richer, you can say, cultural and heritage, you can say, markers of a community, right? So, and many such dialects, so-called dialects, they have died out because of this kind of a mindset. Now, in order to counter, or in order to buttress what I'm saying, Macaulay's design of teaching English to Indians was harshly criticized by his critic Horace Wilson. Horace Wilson is a Sanskrit scholar of 19th century, and he writes, I quote, education for the native, sorry, in Education for the Natives of India, an Asiatic journal, he writes, Macaulay's hidden objectives were by annihilating native literature, by sweeping away all sources of their own moral efforts, by rendering a whole people dependent upon a remote and unknown country, we should degrade their character, depress their energies, and render them incapable of aspiring to any intellectual distinction. Unquote. This is what Wilson says. Means he was trying to unravel what Macaulay had in mind. Now, this debunking vernacular literature does not help the cause of effective English language teaching and learning. We need curriculum which is culturally appropriate, emotionally satisfying, and socially relevant. Even thinker J. Krishnamurti, he says that present generation of learners want to be efficient. We teachers also want to make them efficient without being intelligent. Overuse of technology has made us over informative, but not necessarily intelligent. And what is intelligence? Capacity to perceive the essential. What is essential? To be able to think critically, to be able to think contrastively, and to be able to bring out the meaning. I think there lies the intelligence. I'm quoting a famous academician from India, Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. She says, I quote, in the post-colonial context, the teachers of English can become critical only if it is immediately yoked to the teaching of the literary or cultural production in the mother tongues, unquote. Please remember, she is a professor of English. If I'm correct, she has taught at Jawaharlal Nehru University. If she is recommending this kind of a thing, that if our teaching is not immediately yoked to literary and cultural production in the mother tongues, I think it is something of reckoning. We can give it at least a sincere thought to it, right? So, I think ELT in Indian context has to take care of this this kind of a thing, that our native literature, native aesthetic sensibilities, they can be in the center of English language teaching. As I said in the beginning, the texts and the contexts of our learners is a wonderful resource as far as teaching of English is concerned. And if it is not done, then Professor Krishnaswamy says that our learners will be rootless, solitary, and often scary of English language. I think time has come to start talking about Tolkappiyar, Panini, Aryabhat, Bhaskara, Jayakantham, Vallathol, T.S. Pillai, Kalki, Valmiki, Kamban, Kannadasan, Tulsidas, Premchand in our English language teaching classrooms. Self-directed and learner-centered indigenous material I think can help our learners to be autonomous and to be in the framework of that Vikas model. Two more things before I wind up. It's just few more lines. Since research is very, very important as far as effective teaching is concerned, we teachers of English language, I think we need to go for extensive, original, honest research. Now, the moot question is, what is that original research? We keep talking about research, but what is that original research? Right? So there, with my own understanding and by quoting once again Professor Shirish Chaudhary, I say that good research in ELT must ask new question, not to repeat the same question, but to ask new question, must use new tools, must bring new data, and must offer new answers. If these things are taken care of, I think we are going for an original research as far as language teaching is concerned. There are few challenges before us. I'm not going to talk in detail about the challenges, but just I'm going to list them, maybe 3 or 4, as far as English studies and ELT in India are concerned. The first challenge is dwindling linguistic diversity. As I refer to Bhasha and PLSI project, dwindling linguistic diversity. I think that's a resource for us. As teachers, can we do something to arrest this dwindling linguistic diversity? Dwindling number of students in English programs. You may disagree if you are in a very good university. I'm talking of state universities and state universities which are in the hinterland and rural sections, rural parts of India. Their number is decreasing as far as the admission seekers in English programs are concerned. We need to ponder over. Capacity building of teachers, I think, is an area where we can think of. Very, very important, academic translation of indigenous texts, which will be used in English classrooms. That's also a challenge. And lastly, digital humanities. It has come up a new area where interface of technology and you can say tradition. I'll call it tradition. So this interface of tradition and technology. Now, how to grapple with this idea of tradition and technology and how to make it more effective without giving a backseat to tradition. So that's also an area where we teachers can contribute and think of. I'm not going to refer to a project, in fact, a survey. During lockdown, I did a survey on with my students, 56 students, and I raised 21 questions in front of them related with English teaching and learning. And you will be, surprised to know that almost 87% of them, they said that no, that conventional classroom suits us. Though 86% they use ICT, they know ICT, they know technology, but still equal percentage says that we would love to be in the conventional classrooms because it offers us chance to think critically, chance to encounter the teacher with a lot of questions which come out of our subjective experience. So for that purpose, we need conventional classrooms. So I think I am not the expert on this kind of a thing, but if this is from learners' perspective as teachers, can we, you can say, update ourselves to be good at both tradition as well as technology. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much. I must place on record my most sincere gratitude and thank to the organizing institutes and particularly to Dr. Anthony Sami for giving me this platform to share my thoughts where you're free to agree or disagree. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this excellent presentation, sir. It was very interesting and informative. We got your essence on drivers of transition in language learning and teaching. You made us to understand language, learning, and learner in line in the Indian setting. From your insightful presentation, we realized that learning is
Now, please unmute yourself.
From your insightful presentation, we realized that learning is creation, not conception. Knowledge is not something a learner absorbs, but something a learner creates with social and psychological aspects. We are very much moved with your ask, that is, a positive change in the attitude, skill, and knowledge, which would make the L2 learner to learn effectively. As facilitators, we acquired the ideology of 3 C's and the nature and nurture of a language learner to enable them to attain learner autonomy. Thank you very much, sir. I have few questions from the audience, sir. Shall I proceed with it?
Please.
The first question would be, Father Maria Arakiraj has a valuable questions to ask. Over to Father Maria.
Professor, thank you so much. It was a wonderful lecture. It was a 360-degree spanning lecture, I should say. Wonderful.
Thank you, sir.
So I just wanted to, since you are talking very much about the Indian context and the Indian setting, I just want you to juxtapose these two, the Gurukul system and the learner autonomy that we have been talking about. We see that one is a teacher-centric, the other one is the learner-centric one. How do you juxtapose these and bring them together, sir, in the Indian context? Thank you.
Excellent question, sir. In fact, this point was there in my talk. Somehow I missed it. So thank you for reminding me, juxtaposing the Gurukul system and the modern concept of autonomous, you can say learning or being an autonomous learner. I think I completely agree that the system of Gurukul education or Gurukul system of education was somewhere to make a learner a critical thinker, to think on the world at large, not only to think about himself, but to be skillful at thinking about the world which surrounds him, right? So, and to make him an independent person. Once he goes and face out the world, then he has to be alone, has to be independent to face the world. So I think I'll agree with the point that the Gurukul system of education can be an excellent model as far as practicing autonomous learning or autonomous, or it's a learner autonomy is concerned in modern day English classrooms. I think that's what I can say, and I completely agree with that kind of a thing.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Father Maria. So the next question will be, could you share your views on learner autonomy in post-method pedagogy?
Now, please say that again.
Could you share your views on learner autonomy in post-method pedagogy?
Yeah, post-method pedagogy. I understand. I think I referred in my paper somewhere that when I was talking about John Tickner, in fact, he said that there cannot be one method of English language teaching. And I think as teachers, we understand. Now, these are terms which will keep coming and going. This post-method or no methods, and there can be another term to this. But I think learner autonomy is a perennial, is a perpetual, it is a sustainable kind of method. It's an eclectic approach where one has to, one has to draw pedagogies, one has to draw, you can say, substance from various methods and bring them together and evolve a learner to be a critical thinker. So in post-method pedagogies, learner autonomy, I think, is a wonderful approach, and I think we all must struggle and strive to make our learners autonomous. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, sir. And we have a question from the YouTube audience. Do you think teachers' motivation on virtual platform is really going to work, especially for those who lack academic orientation?
I think answer lies in the question itself. Those who lack academic orientation, how can they motivate others? How can they be self-motivated? I think I said in my paper that please do not forget teachers' motivation will decide learners' motivation. And as teachers, we know that if we are not good researchers, if we lack academic credentials and academic capacity, we ourselves are not motivated to teach to the fullest extent. So if somebody lacks academic motivation or academic enrichment, I think will not be a motivated teacher or motivated person, and this will affect learners' motivation, because academic enrichment gives you strength and confidence to teach. And with strength and confidence, I think motivation is a result of this confidence and strength. So I think answer was there in the question itself. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Dr. K.S. Anthony Sami, sir, has asked a question. Will all the alternatives suggested by you at the end suit local context of ELL, especially in heterogeneous classrooms?
Yes, all may not work. I think it is the discretion of a teacher to decide which model, which paradigm to use in a particular context. I think that's what I said. It's an eclectic kind of process where that's what action research is. I think a teacher has to decide which model works with what kind of students. And in a heterogeneous class, of course, all models may not apply. But one thing is very sure, in all the models, the common factor is somewhere they lead to thinking at least. So as far as learners thinking is promoted, any model would work, I think, in a class. And by and large, all our classes are heterogeneous. I think that's what I can say. I mean, I don't know if I've answered Dr. Sami's good question or not, but that's my perspective.
Thank you, sir. We have come to the end of this session. It's time to express our gratitude to the ardent resource person, Dr. Ravi Bhushan. Gratitude is the fairest blossom which springs from the soul. Dear sir, we are grateful for your valuable time and effort you took to share your views on paradigms of effective English language learning. Your years of research and its rich experience was very much visible through your presentation today. Thank you so much, sir, for this enlightening and informative session. It's a pleasure to convey our gratitude to the active and passionate participants of this international virtual conference. Thank you, dear participants. Let's drop the curtain of this session. We will meet at 2 p.m. for an amazing session on globalization and multiculturalism. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.